of their territorial integrity. The United Nations is not in a
Microphone, please, sir. The 9,131st meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is threats to international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2022/693, the text of a draft resolution submitted by the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall now put the draft resolution to the vote. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2022/693 please raise their hand? The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2651. The meeting is adjourned. The 9,132nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is letter dated 13th September 2022, addressed to the President of the Security Council from the Permanent Representative of Armenia to the United Nations. Document S/2022/688. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Armenia and Azerbaijan to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, invite Mr. Miroslav Zhencha, Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia, and the Americas, Department of Political and Peace-Building Affairs and Peace Operations, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. And I now give the floor to Mr. Miroslav Gencha.
Mr. President, esteemed members of the Council, I thank you for convening this meeting and for providing the opportunity to brief you on recent developments in the South Caucasus. On the evening of 12 September, the authorities in Armenia and Azerbaijan reported heavy fighting on their international border. According to reports, heavy artillery, drones, and large-caliber weapons were used. The exchange of fire reportedly continued through 13 and 14 September. Yesterday evening, it was announced that the ceasefire had been agreed starting at 8 p.m. local time. We welcome this agreement and hope the ceasefire will hold. Earlier this week, the Armenian Ministry of Defense stated that the Azerbaijani side was targeting Armenian military positions as well as civilian infrastructure in the Gegerkunik, Vayotzor, and Siunik regions of the country. Armenia reported 105 of its servicemen killed and 6 civilians wounded as of last night. While Armenia called the events a deliberate attack, Azerbaijan countered that they were retaliatory measures made in response to provocations from Armenia. Azerbaijan, for its part, reported 71 servicemen killed and 2 civilians wounded. Both countries have written to the Secretary General and to the Security Council, alleging violations of the ceasefire brokered by Russia in 2020 and of their territorial integrity. The United Nations is not in a position to verify or confirm the specifics of these reports. We remain deeply concerned, however, over this dangerous escalation, including its possible impact on civilians, and have urged the sides to take immediate and concrete steps to de-escalate tensions. The UN country teams in both Armenia and Azerbaijan maintain open channels with the authorities and stand prepared to respond to emerging humanitarian needs if requested as conditions allow. Mr. President, the fighting this week was the latest and the largest in a series of incidents since 2020. It highlights the fact that the process of normalization of relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan continues to encounter serious obstacles. This escalation also underscores the urgent need for the parties to move forward in the ongoing process of delimitation and demarcation within the framework of mutual recognition of their territorial integrity and sovereignty. We urge the parties to take advantage of this important mechanism as an essential step towards alleviating tensions at the border. This week's events are also a stark reminder that tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan also have the potential to destabilize the region. They highlight the need for all actors in the region and beyond to act constructively and to press the sides to work for a peaceful settlement. In this regard, a number of mediation efforts have been ongoing in the region, including by the Russian Federation and the European Union. We fully support these international efforts. They can lay the groundwork that would allow the parties to resume dialogue towards long-term peace. The Collective Security Organization, at the request of Armenia, will send a mission to Armenia to assess the situation on the border and report back to its member states. The United Nations remains in close contact with concerned parties and organizations, including the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. During my recent visit to the region, I was able to assess firsthand the challenges being faced in resolving the long-lasting conflict. I returned with the conviction that while differences and mistrust persist between the sides, these are surmountable. Mr. President, the international community must remain fully committed to a peaceful settlement between Armenia and Azerbaijan and spare no effort to de-escalate the current tensions, bring the parties back to the negotiating table, and help them achieve peace and stability in the region. In the immediate term, the parties must abide by their obligation to fully implement the trilateral statement on the ceasefire of 9 November 2020. We urge them to return to the negotiating table and take steps towards the signing of a lasting peace treaty. It will be important that a similar unified message come from the Security Council for the parties to focus on a diplomatic solution. Thank you.
Je remercie.
Thank Mr. Chenka for his statement, his briefing. I will now give the floor to members of the Security Council who wish to make statements, and I will start with Gabon.
Je remercie le sous-secrétaire.
Thank you. I thank Assistant Secretary General Mr. for the information he has just conveyed to us on the military confrontation and the situation on the ground between Armenia and Azerbaijan. President, resumed confrontation between the forces of Armenia and Azerbaijan revive the unhappy memories of the conflict of 2020 that led to thousands of losses of life. We deplore these losses on both sides. We condemn the use of armed force, and we affirm that no military solution is viable. Any escalation of violence will only build up a resentment and tension in a complex situation which calls for commitment from all partners having influence in the region or all parties that have influence on the belligerents. After yesterday's meeting, we call on the parties to assure their respect for the agreement on the ground. President, faced with the risk of a flare-up, the international community must mobilize to pacify tensions and avoid an escalation. The many calls for peace that have been raised in recent days are a signal that show the convergence of views to put an end to confrontation. The various sub-regional, regional, and international initiatives intended to bring the parties back to the negotiation table must be supported. Furthermore, the parties must refrain from any action which would feed antagonism or hinder a political settlement. President, it is essential to maintain the ceasefire in Nagorno-Karabakh and along the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia, while reactivating the entire range of diplomatic channels at all levels. My country supports a call of the Secretary General to the parties for a de-escalation and a return to the negotiation table. All our efforts must converge towards this main objective. To conclude, we call on the parties to demonstrate restraint and encourage Council to speak with a single voice to support diplomatic channels activated for a return to peace between the two countries. Thank you, sir.
Merci.
I thank the representative of Gabon for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Let me join others in thanking ASG Miroslav Yenka for updating us on latest developments related to the situation at the Armenia-Azerbaijan border. I thank the Presidency for scheduling the discussion today as an open briefing. Yesterday, the Council's informal deliberations were a timely beginning for us to seriously consider why the situation in the Caucasus, in particular at the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan, continues to be tense. The violent hostilities in Nagorno-Karabakh in September 2020 are still fresh in our minds. The recent reports of attacks along the Armenia-Azerbaijan border, including targeting of civilian settlements and infrastructure, are a matter of deep concern. We call upon the aggressor side to immediately cease hostilities and exercise restraint. These actions pose a serious threat to the peace and stability in the region. This Council thus simply cannot afford to stand by silently and let the situation deteriorate any further. The 9th November 2020 ceasefire brokered by Russia, as well as the peace processes being mediated by the OSCE, the Minsk Group and the EU provide useful mechanisms to resolve all outstanding issues. It has been our consistent submission that such disputes should be settled through diplomacy and dialogue. There can be no military or violent solution to any conflict. We encourage both sides to pursue diplomatic pathways to arrive at a lasting and peaceful solution. Mr. President, in conclusion, let me say that we continue to reiterate that the global order be anchored in international law, the UN Charter, and respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of states. Thank you.
I thank the representative of India for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, President. I would also like to thank ASG for his brief. And I also welcome that the PRs of Armenia and Azerbaijan are here with us today. Tensions have been on the rise again in recent weeks, and we are deeply concerned by the ongoing military hostilities along the Armenian-Azerbaijani border, including reported artillery strikes hitting civilians and civilian infrastructure inside Armenia. Reports indicate that this is the worst fighting seen since the 2020 war over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. Accounts of civilian deaths and injuries on both sides of the conflict are most disturbing. The use of military force to settle dispute is unacceptable. Humanitarian actors are worried about the upsurge of military activity and its potential humanitarian consequences. This activity affects the life and safety of people residing in border areas and blocks their access to essential infrastructure. President, we are, however, encouraged by the news about an agreement on cessation of hostilities. We welcome this initiative and call on both sides to take immediate steps to de-escalate tensions and exercise maximum restraint. Norway recognizes the sovereignty and territorial integrity of both Armenia and Azerbaijan within their international recognized borders. And we continue to support the dialogue between Armenia and Azerbaijan to implement the ceasefire agreement on 9th November 2020. We also welcome the efforts of the European Union and the United States to help advance negotiations. President, we urge Azerbaijan and Armenia to fully implement previously reached agreements and return to the negotiating table in good faith and without preconditions. Any outstanding issues must be resolved peacefully through dialogue and within existing formats. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, and thank you to ASG Genka for your briefing, and we welcome the PRs of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Ireland is deeply concerned by the serious fighting that has broken out along the Armenia-Azerbaijan border in recent days, including reports of attacks directed at critical civilian infrastructure inside Armenian territory, which are prohibited under international humanitarian law. We regret the reported loss of life. Ireland welcomes the update by ASG Genka on a cessation of hostilities. It is vital that the sides exercise maximum restraint and refrain from a further escalation in violence. We urge them to commit to this ceasefire and to respect prior international agreements. We emphasise the absolute need to adhere to the UN Charter. Violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states are never acceptable. All forces must urgently return to the positions they held before this regrettable escalation in hostilities. No forces should remain on the territory of another sovereign state. Mr. President, in Armenia and Azerbaijan, as elsewhere, violence can never be the answer. A sustainable resolution to the conflict is only possible through dialogue and diplomacy. Support renewed efforts towards a negotiated, comprehensive and sustained settlement of the broader conflict, particularly on the longer-term status of Nagorno-Karabakh. We support the common goal of a South Caucasus that enjoys peace, security and prosperity. That is what its people deserve. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Ireland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Assistant Secretary General Mr. Miroslav Chenka for his briefing on the latest developments. I also welcome the participation of Armenia and Azerbaijan in this meeting. Kenya is gravely concerned by the recent reports of renewed fighting along the Armenia-Azerbaijan border, with both sides trading accusations of shelling and amazing of heavy weaponry, as well as strikes against settlements and civilian infrastructure, leading to civilian casualties. We recall that this conflict has previously led to multiple deaths, many injured and displaced. It has also led to destruction of critical civilian infrastructure, including schools and markets, as well as water supplies. Clearly, every effort must be expended to avoid another cycle of violence. In this regard, Kenya urges the parties to refrain from further escalation of the situation. They should exercise maximum restraint and strictly observe the ceasefire agreement made in their statements of November 2021. Mr. President, Kenya supports any efforts to mediate a resolution of the conflict, especially the important role of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs. In this regard, we urge all relevant regional and international actors to actively work with sides to achieve an urgent end to the fighting and return to negotiations towards a comprehensive and sustainable settlement. A settlement that would lead to normalization of relations between the two neighboring countries based on a mutual recognition and respect for each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. To conclude, Mr. President, I reiterate that dialogue should be pursued as the primary option in resolving conflicts. The two countries should engage in good faith for their mutual benefit, as well as regional peace and stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank ASG Yencha for his briefing. China is concerned about the recent armed conflicts and casualties in the border area of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Maintaining regional peace and stability is in the common interests of the two countries. We call on the two countries to exercise restraint, persist in resolving problems and differences through political dialogue, and take measures to avoid further escalation of the situation. As is informed by the briefing just now, both sides have come to a latest ceasefire agreement. We hope that both parties abide by this agreement in a common effort to ease the situation. Armenia and Azerbaijan set up a border demarcation committee last May and held a joint meeting recently. We hope the two sides will continue to interact positively on the border issue. The normalization of relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan is inseparable from the proper settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. China acknowledges the historical development of the issue, and our position has been consistent. We support the resolution of problems and differences through political dialogue and hope that all parties will find a proper solution as soon as possible in accordance with universally recognized international law and norms governing international relations. China welcomes and supports the tripartite joint statement reached by Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan in November 2020, and will continue to support positive progress to be made on the Nagorno-Karabakh issue under the framework of the Minsk Group and with the good offices of Russia. Armenia and Azerbaijan are inseparable neighbors. Maintaining stable bilateral relations and developing forward-looking friendly cooperation is not only in the fundamental interests of the two countries and the two peoples, but also conducive to peace and stability of the whole region. We hope and believe that both countries have full political wisdom in their possession and are able to resolve problems and differences through dialogue and consultation, restore peace and stability, and achieve common security. China is willing to work with the international community to make constructive efforts in easing the situation. I thank Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Assistant Secretary Yanka for the valuable information shared with us, and we welcome the representatives of Armenia and Azerbaijan to this meeting. Mexico expresses its deep concern at the confrontations that have taken place on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. They have tens of dead on both sides, and also, unfortunately, have affected, as we have heard, the civilian population. We call on both parties to respect the ceasefire. The conflict between the two countries in 2020 already was at a high cost for the civilian population and basic infrastructure. The international community should try to avoid a repeated episode of this kind. The parties should respect and fully enforce the agreements signed. This includes the provisions of the agreement of 9 November 2020 and resolve their differences through dialogue. We call on international actors with a greater ability to influence both parties to call on them to return to the negotiating table and to keep dialogue ongoing. We echo the message of support of the Secretary General for the mediation efforts which are currently taking place in the region, particularly the efforts undertaken by the Russian Federation and the European Union. Mexico calls on Armenia and Azerbaijan to demonstrate their political will to put a stop to the hostilities and to resume the path of diplomacy to resolve the differences that persist. Thank you very much, President. I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, I wish to thank ASG Miroslav Jenka for his briefing on the renewed clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan and express our support for the United Nations engagement with the parties to help find a lasting solution to the long-standing conflict that has engulfed the region. I also welcome the representatives of Armenia and Azerbaijan to this meeting. Like other members of this council, Ghana regrets the hostilities that has erupted between Armenia and Azerbaijan early this week, which each side has blamed on the other. The fighting, which is the most intense since November 2020, has resulted in military and civilian casualties on both sides, as we've heard. We are concerned that further escalation of hostilities will have worsening consequences for the region and beyond. We therefore welcome today's meeting as an opportunity for the Council to focus its attention on how this centuries-old conflict, which was re-triggered in 1988, can be peacefully resolved on the basis of established international principles that are mutually acceptable to parties. We strongly believe that the use of violence cannot be the final arbiter for the settlement of this dispute, and welcome reports of the agreement reached by the parties on the evening of 14 September for a cessation of hostilities. We urge them to sustain the truce and renew our call for the complete cessation of hostilities and the de-escalation of tensions. We urge the parties to remain committed to existing ceasefire arrangements, including the trilateral statement of November 2020, made by the leaders of the two countries and the Russian Federation. As we know, the recent clashes have not happened in a vacuum, but have come on the back of unresolved Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. This speaks, in our view, to the need for the intensification of negotiations on all unresolved issues to move the parties closer to a conclusive resolution, which must be based on the principles of international law and with due regard to the United Nations Charter and its provisions relating to the mutual recognition of territorial integrity, the non-use of or threat of the use of force in the acquisition of territory, and the pacific settlement of disputes. We believe that international mediation efforts are critical at this juncture to help remove the mutual distrust and discontent between the parties and facilitate an effective political process for peace. It is in this regard that we encourage the Secretary General's good office's role, urge the reactivated engagement of the AOCS Minsk Group co-chairs, and note the invitation extended by Armenia to the Collective Security Treaty Organization. We also encourage the resumption of talks between the parties following discussions held under the auspices of the European Union Council. The outcomes of the discussions relating to the demarcation and delimitation of borders will help, we believe, to reduce tensions, facilitate the normalization of relations, and set the stage for negotiating a future Armenia-Azerbaijan peace treaty. In closing, we wish to emphasize that at the heart of finding a solution to the dispute should be the willingness of both parties to make the hard sacrifices necessary for the cause of peace. We urge them to work courageously to guarantee the security, rights, and freedoms of all ethnic populations and the right of return of all others who have been displaced. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le...
I thank the representative of Ghana for his statement. And I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank ASG Miroslav Yenka for his briefing, and I welcome the delegations of Armenia and Azerbaijan to this meeting. The border clashes between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces in the last few days are contrary to the spirit and letter of the trilateral declarations of 9 November 2020, 11 January, and 26 November 2021. There is a risk that these incidents undermine the needed trust between Armenia and Azerbaijan and jeopardize the progress of the last 2 years in the peace process. Brazil calls the parties to respect international law and the UN Charter and solve their disputes through dialogue and diplomacy. We urge both sides to avoid actions that could escalate tensions and threaten the security of the civilian population, particularly in the districts affected by these week's clashes. We add our voice to that of other members of the Council in favor of a lasting diplomatic solution to the territorial issues between the two countries, with the framework of the Commission established to demarcate the bilateral border. Brazil will continue to support further political and diplomatic efforts for a lasting and comprehensive peace in the region. We greatly value the moderating influence that the regional actors can exert in preventing violence, are extremely relevant and encourage initiatives in this regard. I also stress that it's most regrettable, the loss of lives, and express my sympathies to those who lost family and friends. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
السيد الرئيس أشكر السيد ميروسلاف جينكا على إحاطته الوافية.
President, I thank Mr. Yensha for his briefing on recent developments between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and I congratulate the representatives of Azerbaijan and Armenia for being here this morning. I wish to express our satisfaction at the ceasefire reached yesterday evening, and we welcome the efforts of negotiation which led to this agreement. We express our deep concern at the military confrontations in border areas, as well as information on casualties and damage to infrastructure. Due to our attachment to avoiding a further escalation, we wish efforts to converge for a lasting ceasefire and for both parties to demonstrate restraint, as the Secretary General stated on September 13th. We hope that positive developments will continue so that both parties will reach a global agreement for lasting peace, which will prevent harm to civilians. Any escalation in today's world, a repeated crisis and humanitarian suffering, will weaken the current world order. The Security Council should do its utmost to prevent a crisis. We call on both parties to return to the negotiation table and settle their differences peacefully. We have witnessed positive and promising developments in progress in negotiations. We've also seen encouraging indications for the settlement of the dispute between the parties. Tangible progress must be made in the peace process. We hope that the parties will continue their mediation efforts constructively and sincerely in order to achieve a lasting peaceful solution and to prevent the region from suffering the repercussions which might lead to an escalation and threaten the peace and stability of the region. We reiterate the importance of preserving the ceasefire and for the parties to continue their efforts to reach a peaceful solution within the framework of the United Nations Charter. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank also ASG Yencha for his update. Like others here, we are deeply concerned by the report of heavy fighting that has taken place along the Armenian and Azerbaijani borders during these last days. Exchange of fire with many casualties, including civilians, have been reported by both sides. We express regret for the loss of lives. This was the worst escalation of hostilities between the two countries since 2020. We have welcomed with optimism the positive developments during the last weeks between Armenia and Azerbaijan, especially the fourth high-level meeting organized on August 31st in Brussels under the auspices of the President of the European Council. The recent armed clashes run counter and undermine such efforts. We hope that these incidents will not undo the progress achieved. As we know, dealing with difficult and complex issues in post-conflict situations needs trust, resolve, and continued efforts. We have carefully read the communications from both countries and listened to the briefing here of ASG Yencha. In such volatile situation, and with the information we have, it is not easy to have full clarity based on independently verified facts. While parties blame each other, we highlight the importance of avoiding any actions which feed into mistrust and including military buildup or other provocations along the border. The blame game and retaliatory measures will only bring more clashes and could lead to renewed fighting and an open conflict with serious consequences. These serious and worrying developments are a stark reminder of the volatility and the fragility of the situation on the ground in the absence of a peace treaty. Mr. President, the latest acts of violence have erupted beyond the Nagorno-Karabakh region. It is important and urgent to do the utmost so that the conflict lines do not spread further. As everybody knows, European security is already under serious threat from the ongoing war in Ukraine. A further escalation of the situation in the region could leading to the outbreak of a conflict would have far-reaching consequences that would transcend the regional borders. As in every conflict, civilians are the first to suffer. But let's not forget also that the wider South Caucasus is a crucial artery for energy commodities to Europe and the world markets. At a time when the world markets have been deeply affected by the ongoing war in Ukraine, with severe impacts on energy markets, any further disruption elsewhere would only increase the volatility and make the global situation worse. And needless to say that the humanitarian situation would worsen even further, and we do not need any more of it. We support international efforts within existing formats, including the OSCE and the active role from the European Union to stop hostilities. We welcome the ceasefire, which entered in force yesterday evening, which, according to reports, is being respected so far. We call on the sides to continue its implementation. We welcome the strong involvement of the European Union in the normalization process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, including at the highest levels through President of the European Council, Charles Michel. And we reiterate that there is no alternative to a peaceful negotiating solution of the conflict, but through the path of diplomacy. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and thank you to the Assistant Secretary General for the very helpful update, and we welcome the ambassadors of Azerbaijan and Armenia to the Chamber. The United Kingdom welcomes the news of a ceasefire brokered on the evening of the 14th of September, but we remain deeply concerned over numerous reports of civilian casualties caused by the military action that was launched earlier this week. The long-standing position of the United Kingdom is that there is no military solution to this conflict. We have been urging an immediate and sustained cessation of all military activity and for armed forces to withdraw to their original positions before this escalation. It's only through diplomacy in line with the principles of the UN Charter that lasting peace can be achieved. This was demonstrated by encouraging developments in recent weeks, including the return of prisoners of war by Azerbaijan and the trilateral meetings held in Brussels. We urge the leaders of both Armenia and Azerbaijan to re-engage in good faith in this dialogue with the support of the international community and to return to substantive negotiations to settle all outstanding matters between them. The United Kingdom will continue to support the diplomatic efforts of international partners in Vienna and Brussels as they seek to secure much-needed stability and security for the people of the region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Mr. President, thank you, Special Assistant Secretary General Jinka, for your useful briefing this morning. Let me begin by noting that we are deeply troubled over the outbreak of violence along the Armenia and Azerbaijan border, including reports of shelling of civilian infrastructure in Armenia. We offer our condolences to the families of those killed and injured in this renewed violence. The United States has engaged with Armenian and Azerbaijani officials and conveyed our deep concern of military actions along the border. We are particularly disturbed by reports of civilians being harmed inside Armenia. All sides must fully observe their obligations under international humanitarian law, including those related to protection of civilians. Mr. President, like others, the United States welcomes the cessation of all hostilities and encourages both parties to continue to exercise restraint. Military forces should now disengage to allow both parties to resolve all outstanding issues through peaceful negotiations. There's an urgent need to return to talks aimed at a lasting peaceful resolution to the conflict and the normalization of relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I want to be clear today. The United States is firm. There can be no military solution to the conflict. We urge both governments to reestablish direct lines of communication across diplomatic and military channels and recommit to the diplomatic process. A negotiated, comprehensive settlement of all remaining issues between Armenia and Azerbaijan is needed, and the international community must continue to engage diplomatically to help broker a lasting peace. The United States is dedicated to a sustainable ceasefire and peaceful resolution. Secretary Blinken spoke with Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan and Azerbaijani President Aliyev to convey our deep concern over military actions along the border. And Ambassador Phil Rieker, our senior advisor for Caucasus negotiations, is in the region meeting with senior Azerbaijani and Armenian leaders. The United States is committed to promoting a peaceful, democratic, and prosperous future for the South Caucasus region. We urge the parties to intensify their diplomatic engagement and to make use of existing mechanisms for direct communication to find comprehensive solutions to all outstanding issues related to and resulting from the conflict. We stand ready to facilitate dialogue between Armenia and Azerbaijan bilaterally, through the OSCE, and in coordination with partners in order to achieve a long-term political settlement of the conflict in accordance with international law, including the UN Charter, as well as the Helsinki Final Act. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we'd like to thank the Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Yencha for his briefing. The Russian Federation is extremely concerned by the drastic escalation of the situation in some areas on the Armenia-Azerbaijani border in the night of between the 12th and 13th September and the following exchanges of fire. As a result, a large number of military personnel died, and there are also victims among the civilians, and we express our heartfelt condolences to their families and wish the wounded a speedy recovery. We think that using force is unacceptable, and we expect that all of the agreements on the ceasefire arrived at with Russian mediation will be abided by. We call on Azerbaijan and Armenia to exercise restraint and refrain from steps which can increase tension, and also to strictly abide the agreements reached within the trilateral statements made by the leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia on the 9th of November 2020, 11th January, and 26th November 2021. So as to stabilize the situation, the leadership of the Russian Federation is in close contact with Baku and Yerevan. The issues of lowering tension was something that was discussed during phone calls between the President of Russia, Putin, and the Prime Minister of Armenia, Pashinyan, Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Ministers of Defense of Russia and Armenia. We expect that this topic will be at the center of the meeting between Mr. Putin with the President of Azerbaijan, Mr. Aliyev, in the margins of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Samarkand on the 15th, 16th of September. Substantial efforts are being undertaken also by the Ministry of Defense and the Border Patrol Service of Russia. We are in close contact with both countries so as to arrive at a sustainable ceasefire and the return of the Azerbaijani and Armenian military to their positions of origin. This was discussed at the extraordinary session convened by the Council of CSTO on 13th of September. An outcome of that was an agreement to send to the Republic of Armenia a mission by the Secretariat and the joint staff of the CSTO so as to study the situation in regions on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan and coming up with recommendations which subsequently are to be considered by the heads of states of members of CSTO. The mission is headed by the Secretary General of CSTO, Mr. Stanislav Zas, and the Chief of the Joint Staff of CSTO, Mr. Sidorov. Today, mission is beginning its work, and we expect that the objective word of the mission on the ground will be one of the factors which will help de-escalate the situation. We continue thinking that all of the outstanding issues between Armenia and Azerbaijan need to be resolved through political and diplomatic means exclusively. And when it comes border issues within the framework of the work by the Bilateral Commission to delimit the Armenian-Azerbaijani border with the advisory assistance from Russia. By the way, the first meeting of national delegations took place on the 24th of May at the very border. The second meeting took place in Moscow on the 30th of August. The main work will be conducted by Baku and Yerevan, by we stand ready to exchange our experience when it comes to delimitation and demarcation borders in the post-Soviet era, provide cartography and other materials, and extend other advisory or technical assistance. So as to make sure our efforts are effective, it is important to make sure that the level of stability is increased and security in the border areas without interference from outside, and to avoid politicization. Unfortunately, as was shown by the events on the 20th and 13th of September, the issues of delimitation, demarcation are very sensitive, and there are breakdowns and flare-ups. What is needed is swift stabilization and the return to dialogue. Mr. President, the Russian side is making every effort possible to normalize relations between countries on the basis of the mentioned trilateral statements made by the leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. The first of them, first of all, stop the hostilities and determine the parameters for deployment along the Lachin corridor and the contact line in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict area for the Russian peacekeeping contingent. Our peacekeepers continue ensuring the ceasefire regime in their area of responsibility, and also help resolve urgent humanitarian issues. In pursuance of the first statement provisions in January 2021, the next one was adopted, and it is on how to unblock all economic and transport links in the region. We now have a trilateral working group under joint chairmanship of the Vice Prime Minister of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia. They have conducted serious work. They're agreeing packages of projects emphasizing launching the rail and automobile links between Azerbaijan and Armenia, with possibly connecting them with neighboring countries. Such projects also include the building of a railroad and an automobile road between the western regions of Azerbaijan and the Nakhichevan Autonomous Republic through the Sunik Oblast in Armenia. One of the key points of the third statement made on the 26th November 2021 was just that, creating the mechanism of demarcation and delimitation of the border. Furthermore, one of the central points of our efforts to help normalize relations is the topic of preparing the peace treaty. And the fact that Russian services are needed was confirmed to us by both sides. And we approach this with great deal of responsibility. Despite current escalation of tension, the work continues. And the Russian Special Representative on normalizing relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Mr. Igor Khavaev, visited Baku on 8th and 9th of September and Yerevan on the 13th and 14th of September. Consultations and search for points of convergence will continue. It is obvious that we are at the beginning of a difficult road towards reconciliation between the two countries. We're convinced that the basis for the normalization between the two will be based on the full implementation of the trilateral statement made by the leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. All three documents are comprehensive, inextricably linked, and their provisions flow one from another. And their implementation will create the conditions for lasting peace in Southern Caucasus, which is in the interest not only of the states in the region, but all of its neighbors as well. Russia intends to continue extending all assistance possible to Baku and Yerevan so as to implement the agreements within the formats and the scope that are acceptable to both sides. Sustainable results is something that will require time and considerable efforts, both by Baku and Yerevan, and will also require the unity of the international community. Geopolitical competition and zero-sum games can only damage this process. But the main thing for today is to stop armed clashes and to implement the ceasefire agreements. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of France. I thank Mr. Jenka for his statement. France is deeply concerned by the actions that have taken place at the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This has led to dozens of casualties. Several locations on Armenian territory were fired on, and and there were reports of strikes that affected civilian infrastructure. This is the most severe fighting since the war of 2020. Faced with this escalation, France, together with its partners, is working to encourage a return to respect for the ceasefire. President Macron spoke with the Armenian Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, and the Azerbaijani President, Ilham Aliyev. There were three main messages that emerged. First, the absolute priority must be strict respect for the ceasefire of 9 November 2020. We are all held by the Charter of the United Nations to settle our differences peacefully. Two, we call on Azerbaijan to hold its forces in their initial positions. In this case, and because of the advance of Azerbaijani forces beyond some portions of the frontier, the territorial integrity of Armenia must be respected. Lastly, parties must resume and intensify dialogue to negotiate settlement of all ongoing issues. We call on the parties to make progress on discussions on delimitation and demarcation of the border and the ways of preventing new incidents and violence by separating forces, for example. France reminds the parties that they're bound to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law and calls on them to allow and facilitate the safe, rapid, and unhampered passage of humanitarian assistance to populations. We hail the action of the ICRC. We call for the release of prisoners. In this regard, we welcome the release of 5 Armenian prisoners by Azerbaijan on September 8. France remains ready to contribute to these goals along with all parties in the Secretariat of the United Nations, as co-chair of the Minsk Group, a member state of the European Union, and alongside the European Union. France will continue supporting all efforts towards reaching lasting peace in the region. We particularly welcome the efforts of the President of the European Council, who met President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan 4 times since November 2021 to encourage dialogue and reach progress in the different aspects of normalizing relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The Security Council must remain seized of the question, and the efforts of the members must converge to put an end to hostilities, ensure lasting respect for the ceasefire, and contribute to the implementation of commitments made by the parties in the framework of the trilateral declarations and the mediation efforts of the President of the European Council. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I give the floor to the representative of Armenia.
Mr. President, I would like to express appreciation to the French presidency for convening today's emergency meeting upon the request contained in the letter of the Foreign Minister of Armenia. The meeting is taking place at a grave time for my country, as acts of criminal aggression have been perpetrated against the territorial integrity of the Republic of Armenia in flagrant violation of the international law and the UN Charter. The perpetrator does indeed have a name: Azerbaijan, Armenia's neighbor to the east, who is multiple times larger in territory, population, and resources, whose pervasive record of hostile conduct, rhetoric, and unchecked disproportionate violence demonstrates a most dangerous pattern of utter disregard for every tenet and norm of the international law, and reveals a clear intention to instigate wars, destruction, and instabilities in the region. In the early hours of 13 September, Azerbaijan initiated a major military offensive targeting the eastern and southeastern regions of Armenia with the use of a wide range of weaponry, including artillery and combat UAVs. The offensive took lives of 105 people, left dozens wounded, dozens missing, and inflicted various forms of material damage, including upon the civilian settlements and infrastructure. The scale of destruction and the intensity of shelling is so high that at the moment we have only the initial figures. Around 200 homes of civilians have suffered serious damage, with more than 60 of them completely destroyed. For a few consecutive days, a number of densely populated towns of Armenia, including Goris, Jermuk, Barteni, Gabon, and Sot, came under heavy fire. The latest reports indicate that the offensive has displaced at least 2,750 people in Gerarkunik, Vajdzor, and Sunik provinces, which include 370 children and 55 persons with disabilities among those displaced. The shelling of the resort town of Jermuk, which has absolutely no military targets, is nothing short of war crime. And so are the strikes against the Kechu water reservoir with potentially catastrophic human toll and environmental impact. In flagrant violation of the Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law, at least 7 identified prisoners of war have been captured, with video evidence suggesting there could be more captives held by Azerbaijan. The offensive targeted journalists, both local and foreign, who were carrying out their work covering the events. Mr. President, we're often reflecting within the United Nations and in this chamber on the challenges for justice and accountability. In doing so, we are constantly reminded that impunity for the past crimes can lead to the most serious violations in the future, the ultimate manifestation of which are genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Advancing early warning and accurate reporting capacities of the United Nations to monitor and respond includes identifying the systematic policies of promulgating hate speech, incitement, and glorification of violence on the basis of ethnicity or religion, in particular when such policies are state-led. Mr. President, over the past year, we have repeatedly brought to the attention of this Council that Azerbaijan has been engaging in illegal practice of acquisition of territories by force, having duly reported such acts of aggression under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Through the letters dated 14 May, 29 July, and 16 November 2021, Armenia alerted the members of the Council about Azerbaijan's persistent violations of the norms and principles of international law, as well as the provisions of the trilateral statement of 9 November 2020 on the establishment of ceasefire and cessation of hostilities following the 44-day war in 2020. The latest attacks come to demonstrate that in the absence of proper accountability measures, policies of aggression are likely to continue and even increase in scope and scale. It also follows that, emboldened by the results of the use of force in the past, Azerbaijan now seeks to normalize violence and aggression to capture territories by force. During the past 2 days, Azerbaijan has intruded and then occupied over 10 square kilometers of the sovereign territories of Armenia. This attack follows the offensives in May and November 2021, when Azerbaijan occupied around 45 square kilometers of the land of Armenia. The actions of Azerbaijan are in blatant violation of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, in particular Article 2.4 of the Charter, in violation of the OSCE Helsinki Final Act, in violation of international humanitarian law. Moreover, the military aggression of Azerbaijan goes against the letter and spirit of the trilateral statements of November 9, 2020 and November 26, 2021. The latter, in particular, stipulates that the sides agreed, I quote, to take steps to increase the level of stability and security on the Azerbaijani-Armenian border, unquote. I should particularly underline that this act of aggression occurred in the context of peace negotiations conducted in different fora and facilitated different actors. Armenia has engaged in all these processes in good faith, with the aim of stabilizing the situation in South Caucasus. Armenia has publicly undertaken to work towards a peaceful region and declared its readiness to launch negotiations towards a peace agreement. This aggression is the answer of Azerbaijan to the mediation efforts of the international community. Mr. President, as we speak, we are receiving reports that the fragile ceasefire is under threat. There are credible reports that Azerbaijan is planning another military offensive by widening the geography of the aggression, including from the direction of Nakhichevan, to realize their unlawful ambitions towards establishing an extraterritorial corridor through the sovereign territory of Armenia. Mr. President, the representative of Azerbaijan is here to offer justifications for the country's predatory conduct. Make no mistake, there is none, at least not under international law. For all the talk about manufactured pretexts like Armenia's provocations, occupation, or Azerbaijan's right to self-defense and counterattacks, the truth is that no such actual armed attacks has been initiated by Armenia. We understand that for many years, blame game and speculation have been Azerbaijan's best friends, and that it is precisely for this reason that Azerbaijan has been so vehemently opposing any idea leading to the creation of internationally monitored verification mechanisms to identify ceasefire violations. Such measures, if established, would be instrumental to ending blame game. They would be critical to helping to sustain ceasefire so that peace and diplomacy get a chance. Today's acts of aggression are in reality nothing short of the product of an intentional decision to walk away from the Nagorno-Karabakh negotiations and to opt for a military solution to the conflict. The very fact that a large-scale military operation was unleashed amidst an unprecedented pandemic in 2020 is a crime of global proportion in itself and should be evaluated and addressed on its own merit, or rather the lack of that. It follows that the use of force and threats have become a distinct pattern of behavior of Azerbaijan in all conflict situations. The claim that Azerbaijan resolved Nagorno-Karabakh conflict by force, abolished all collective rights of people of Nagorno-Karabakh, and even eliminated the very name of this Armenian-populated land are illustrative to this end. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, Armenia is well aware of the challenges and complexities that the present-day international politics has to offer. We are equally cognizant of the growing energy demand in the world. Having said that, we appeal to the Council to stand up to its responsibility under the UN Charter for the maintenance of international peace and security. Azerbaijan is yet to abide by its humanitarian obligations vis-à-vis Armenian POWs, commit good faith to the preservation of the Armenian cultural and religious heritage, as well as address the anti-Armenian rhetoric, including at the level of public officials and institutions, as rendered by the International Court of Justice through the provisional measures issued against Azerbaijan under the Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination in December 2021. We strongly urge the members of the Security Council to come up with tangible outcomes after the discussion in this emergency meeting, with strong condemnation of the unprovoked aggression of Azerbaijan against the sovereign territory of the Republic of Armenia, demanding immediate and unconditional withdrawal of its forces from the sovereign territory of my country, demanding to refrain from any future acts of aggression against the territorial integrity of Armenia and fully comply with its international obligations and commitments, including the UN Charter, Helsinki Final Act, and the trilateral statements at the highest level. We call on the Council to urge to engage peacefully, to urge Azerbaijan to engage peacefully in the negotiation process, including on issues resulted from and related to Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, including that of the status. We call to release and repatriate all Armenian prisoners of war, indicating that contrary constitutes a violation of international humanitarian law. And I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Armenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Azerbaijan.
Mr. President, this meeting of the Security Council takes place in the aftermath of serious military escalation along the undelimited state border between Armenia and Azerbaijan, recklessly provoked by Armenia to torpedo the fragile post-conflict normalization process being pursued with active engagement of relevant international actors, including the members of this august body. As such, it is our expectation that today's deliberations will send an appropriate message confirming the support of the international community for the search for negotiated diplomatic solutions to all issues pertaining to the normalization of interstate relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, the statement that we have just heard from the representative of Armenia demonstrates the quite opposite intention of this member state to abuse the Security Council, to cover up its continuous and systematic efforts, both in rhetoric and actions, with the aim to evade the implementation of its commitments. We categorically reject the allegations made by the representative of Armenia. These allegations, full of standard set of fabrications, distortions and deceptions, demonstrates how Armenia is far from complying with its international obligations and promoting peace, stability, and cooperation in our region. It is ironic that Armenia, the country which unleashed aggression against Azerbaijan, held the sovereign territories of my country under occupation for almost 30 years, carried out ethnic cleansing on a massive scale, and committed other heinous crimes during the war, enthusiastically talks now on the norms and principles that it has consistently violated and appeals to the Security Council, whose resolutions it has refused to implement in the hope of endless impunity. In fact, the lack of adequate attention and targeted measures to implement the demands of the Security Council encouraged Armenia to consolidate the results of the unlawful use of force against Azerbaijan. Thus, the consequences of the aggression remained unaddressed and further aggravated. It is the occupation of the part of state border for nearly 30 years that made delimitation and demarcation impossible, which once happened in time would have prevented the latest escalation. Therefore, attempts by Armenia to portray itself as an ardent defender of the commonly agreed principles, norms, and values are not capable of whitewashing the well-known real image of this country as a persistent violator of international law and human rights. That Armenia is yet to comply with its international obligations and commit itself genuinely to peace and stability in the region is evidenced by its continued use of obsolete or fake names for the localities in Azerbaijan. The references in the statement of the representative of Armenia to such names, which have neither historical nor legal grounds whatsoever, are testament to this government's continued territorial claims against Azerbaijan and apparent disregard for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of my country. I have to emphasize that Armenia has neither legal nor a political or moral ground to make any statements concerning the internationally recognized territory of Azerbaijan or the matters falling within my country's exclusive sovereign rights, competence, and responsibilities. Mr. President, on the night of the 12th to 13th September 2022, the armed forces of Armenia committed a large-scale military provocation in the direction of the Dashtsan, Kalbajar, and Lachin districts of the Azerbaijan-Armenia state border, attempting to plant mines on the roads between the military positions of Azerbaijani army, taking advantage of nighttime and difficult terrain. Further, the positions of the armed forces of Azerbaijan were subjected to intensive fire with different types of weapons, including mortars and artillery. As a result, that night, 42 servicemen of the Azerbaijani army and 8 bodyguards were killed, and significant damage was inflicted on the military infrastructure. Azerbaijan took adequate and proportionate measures to neutralize the threat against its sovereignty and territorial integrity, ensure the safety of its military personnel and civilians who were involved in ongoing rehabilitation and reconstruction works in close vicinity of the state border. The countermeasures taken in response to Armenia's provocations were limited and targeted as legitimate military objects. Contrary to allegations we have just heard from the representative of Armenia, the Ministry of Health of this country reported no casualties or injuries among civilians. It is also worth mentioning that Armenian social media are full of photographs depicting so-called the destruction of civilian objects allegedly on the territory of Armenia. In fact, these are the photographs after the missile strikes on the cities of Azerbaijan by the Armenian armed forces during the war in the fall of 2020. In particular, the city center of Barda, which came under massive rocket fire on 28th of October, causing the death of 21 and injuring more than 70 civilians. Taking into account the appeals of our international partners, an agreement on ceasefire was reached starting from September 13th, 9 a.m. Baku time. However, in a reckless attempt for further escalation of the crisis, for political manipulation with the attention of the international community, the armed forces of Armenia continued attacks and provocations in the border areas using artillery and other heavy weapons. As a result of violations by Armenia of the established ceasefire, Azerbaijan suffered further losses and casualties among the military personnel. In addition, 2 civilians were seriously wounded. In total, 71 servicemen of the armed forces of Azerbaijan perished. Of particular concern is that Armenia resorted to yet another gross violation of international humanitarian law while locating its armed forces and heavy equipment within the residential areas in the vicinity of the borderline. Needless to say that it aimed at substantiating groundless accusations against Azerbaijan of shelling civilian infrastructure, which Armenia had been trying to impose through its propaganda channels since the early minutes of the escalation. Yet, the armed forces of Azerbaijan demonstrated utmost restraint and professionalism and limited to targeting exclusively fire points of Armenia with high-precision weapons to suppress its attacks on the positions of Azerbaijan. In view of Armenia's overt attempt for further escalation, Azerbaijan took several steps, including through contacts with relevant international partners, and demonstrated good faith and genuine will to restore the ceasefire that already agreed upon a day before. Among others, the Azerbaijani side declared its willingness to return to Armenia the remains of its deceased military personnel on a unilateral basis and informed ICRC accordingly. Eventually, ceasefire was restored effective of 8 a.m. local time, which is 12 noon U.S. Eastern Time on September 14th, through direct communication channels between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and since then it is now being maintained as confirmed by both sides. But now we have heard absolutely provocative statement on the part of Armenian representative. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan are now engaged in dealing with humanitarian consequences, including the retrieval of dead bodies. Azerbaijan reiterated to Armenia that the relevant humanitarian actors present on the ground its readiness to return the deceased Armenian soldiers unilaterally. Moreover, as a result of escalation, several Armenian soldiers fell under the control of Azerbaijan. They are treated fully in line with the norms and principles of international humanitarian law. Necessary first medical aid was provided to those injured. Both sides are in contact with a view to facilitate their soonest repatriation. Thus, there is a ground for cautious optimism that common sense will finally prevail and yet another military adventure irresponsibly resorted to by Armenia will be overcome without further undermining the shaky normalization process between the two countries after almost 30 years long bloody conflict. In this context, it is important more than ever for the entire international community to contribute to this process and thus refrain from one-sided actions and statements that would complicate the already delicate situation. Mr. President, the escalation at the state border was not an isolated incident, but another link in the chain of destabilizing actions by Armenia over the past month. Suffice it to mention just a few. Last month, on August 3rd, Armenia resorted to military provocations in the direction of Lachen district of Azerbaijan, which were reported to the Secretary General and the Security Council in letter S/2022/638. From September 2nd onwards, after the fourth trilateral meeting between the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia, mediated by the President of the European Council, Mr. Charles Michel, which was held on 31st August in Brussels, the armed forces of Armenia intensified fire against the positions of the armed forces of Azerbaijan along the border in the direction of the Kalbajar and Lachen districts. Following the Brussels meeting, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia made provocative statements in connection with the anniversary of the so-called independence of the unlawful regime that Armenia established and maintained on the territories of Azerbaijan in the years of their occupation, while the Secretary of the Security Council of Armenia illegally visited the city of Hankandi in Azerbaijan. Furthermore, in breach of the provisions of the trilateral statement regarding the cessation of all military activities, as well as of its other international obligations, Armenia continued to plant mines at a massive scale on the territory of Azerbaijan. Since August 15, 2022, more than 1,300 anti-personnel mines have been found in the Lachen district alone. It was established that these mines were manufactured in Armenia in 2021. Accordingly, laid on the territory of Azerbaijan after the signing of the trilateral statement of 10 November 2020. Massive mine planting by Armenia on the territory of Azerbaijan continues along with Armenia's consistent failure to share accurate and comprehensive information about the hundreds of thousands of landmines it indiscriminately laid on Azerbaijan's territory during the conflict. As a result, after the signing of the trilateral statement, more than 240 citizens of Azerbaijan were killed or injured by mine explosions. Out of these mine explosions, 134, in other words, more than 50%, took place in areas not covered by the minefield records shared by Armenia. This is indicative of indiscriminate nature of mine planting by Armenia in gross violation of the relevant international norms and demonstrates the true scale and gravity of the humanitarian threat facing Azerbaijani civilians. Further, in violation of Article 4 of the trilateral statement, Armenia has not completely withdrawn the remnants of its armed forces and illegal armed formations from the territory of Azerbaijan, where the peacekeepers, Russian Federations, are temporarily deployed. There are also almost 4,000 citizens of Azerbaijan, both civilians and military, remaining missing in connection with the conflict. Armenia fails to clarify the whereabouts of these persons who fell into its hands but have not been seen since. Even after the end of the conflict, Armenia continues to allow racist hate groups formed for the specific purpose of inciting and committing violence against Azerbaijanis to operate openly and notoriously on its territory in violation of international law, in apparent regard for the order on provisional measures adopted by the International Court of Justice on December 7, 2021, in the case on the application of the International Convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, Azerbaijan versus Armenia. This is the overall context in the run-up to the recent large-scale military provocations on the border by Armenia. Mr. President, domestically, my government prioritized the rehabilitation and reconstruction of the liberated territories and their integration in the country's economy to ensure the safe return of the displaced population in high standards of living. Impressive large-scale post-conflict investment, rehabilitation, and reconstruction projects are underway in close proximity of the areas where the armed hostilities recently erupted. after almost 3 decades of occupation and denial of their basic human rights, the first group of Azerbaijani IDPs recently returned to the newly constructed Ali village in the liberated Zangilan district. Further, Azerbaijan is about to complete the construction of the new airport in Zangilan, close to the state border with Armenia. The government of Azerbaijan also takes consistent and successful efforts toward building interaction with local Armenian residents, including most recently in addressing important water and energy supply issues in the region. Consequently, Azerbaijan cannot be interested in any military activity in these areas that put under danger such a large-scale, multi-million rehabilitation and reconstruction projects being implemented with foreign investors. On the contrary, escalation in the vicinity of newly liberated territories aims at preventing the restoration of the demographic situation in the conflict-affected territories by enabling safe return of several hundreds of thousands Azerbaijani IDPs to their place of origin. In this regard, it is not coincidence that Armenia continues at full swing the militarization of the borderline areas in preparation for military provocations. Furthermore, a few days ago, as a goodwill gesture, Azerbaijan released and handed over to Armenia 5 Armenian servicemen who were previously charged and imprisoned for criminal offenses. This step was taken with a view to strengthening trust and improving the atmosphere for peace talks. Mr. President, it is evident that by resorting to political and military provocations, Armenia tried to backtrack from the implementation of the agreements reached between the two countries, undermine the process of normalization of interstate relations, involve third parties into bilateral issues, and expand the geography of tensions for sustaining its territorial claims and revanchist objectives. Against this background, it is important that the international community resolutely condemn Armenia's policy and actions, which run counter to the Charter of the United Nations and international law, demand that Armenia strictly comply with international obligations, focus on their implementation, and engage in good faith in the result-oriented process of normalizing interstate relations. Ensuring lasting peace, development, progress, and good neighborliness is the basis of Azerbaijan's vision for the future. Azerbaijan is firm in its determination to continue efforts towards advancing rehabilitation, reconstructions, and reintegration of its conflict-affected territories, as well as ensuring justice and preventing and eliminating by all legitimate means any threats to the safety and well-being of its people and the state's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Azerbaijan is committed to regional peace, stability, and development. Establishment of good neighborly relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan is a key for building secure, stable, and prosperous South Caucasus through full-fledged regional normalization. Border delimitation and demarcation through bilateral commissions and opening of transport communications are the two tracks of interstate normalization complementing negotiations on a bilateral peace treaty. Azerbaijan's position in this regard is clear, principled, and consistent, and is based on international law and established international practice. It is Azerbaijan that right after the end of the conflict initiated the process of normalizing interstate relations with Armenia based on mutual recognition and respect for each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity within their internationally recognized borders, including through the signing of a peace treaty based on these principles. Azerbaijan counts on the support of the international community in its efforts both domestically in terms of eliminating consequences of almost 30-year-lasting occupation of its territories and in the interstate track aimed at building good neighborly relations with Armenia. Taking this into account and taking this opportunity, we reiterate our call on the international community to persuade Armenia to reciprocate the offer of Azerbaijan, cease its political and military provocations, abandon aggressive rhetoric and actions, and engage in good faith in direct negotiations to find peaceful diplomatic diplomatic solutions to all issues pertaining to interstate relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Azerbaijan for their long statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.